Gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Burton, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, at the request of a lady named Madeline Pickens, I met with Mr. Bob Abbey, who's the head of the Bureau of Land Management, to talk to him about dealing with the wild horses, the Mustangs that roam out west in the western states. And the Bureau of Land Management has somewhere between 35 and 40,000 of these Mustangs in pens around the country. And the cost of this is estimated to be as much as $2,500 per horse per year. And the Bureau of Land Management just yesterday or last week started rounding up another 3 or 4 or 5,000 of them to take them to holding pens and move them to Oklahoma. Now, the thing that's interesting about this is when I talked to Mr. Abbey, he admitted that they want to move these horses from Nevada 1,000 miles to Oklahoma in order to put them in these pens. Now, Miss Pickens, she is very concerned about these Mustangs because they're part of America's heritage, and she wants to protect them as much as possible. And toward that end, she bought 2 ranches. The Spruce Ranch, which has 14,000 acres in it, and the ranch next to it in Nevada, the Worm Creek Ranch, which has about another 4,000 acres. And then she got permits for another 550,000 acres so that they could put those horses on this land, protect them, and save the taxpayer money and make sure that these horses will not be put in pens and shipped all over the country. But the Bureau of Land Management is recalcitrant. They want to move these horses 1,000 miles into these pens, and they want to keep them there at a cost of as much as $2,500 per year per horse. Now, Miss Pickens says that for $500 a year, she can keep them on her range and protect them, create a kind of museum for these horses so that people can come and see them in the wild, and she would have them injected so that they can't reproduce. Therefore, they wouldn't have to worry about an expanding population of Mustangs, but they would be protected. But the Bureau of Land Management wants to move them 1,000 miles, where her ranch and her permits are within just a few months of where the horses are right now. Now, when I talked to Mr. Abbey last week, he said that they couldn't reach an agreement with Miss Pickens, that there'd have to be some major changes made over at the Bureau of Land Management in order for them to facilitate what she wants to do. This is another bureaucratic nightmare that we in this Congress should not, and I don't believe will, put up with. And I'm going to ask the Appropriations Committee to cut the budget of the Bureau of Land Management because they're wasting the taxpayers' money by millions and millions and maybe hundreds of millions of dollars. Last year, the government spent about $144 million managing private livestock on federal public lands, and they only collect $21 million for grazing rights. So they lost at least $123 million per year, and some people estimate that they lose as much as $500 million a year, $500 million, by keeping these grazing lands in private hands where people get them for almost nothing. $21 million was what the fee was that they got last year. So they're losing as much as $500 million. They're moving these horses up to 1,000 miles, and they're doing it for no good purpose other than the bureaucracy wants to keep control of them. Now, the reason Miss Pickens started this organization to protect these Mustangs was because in 2008, the Bureau of Land Management said, well, they weren't sure they could take care of all these horses. They have almost 40,000 in these pens right now. So they were thinking about killing them, euthanasia, starting to kill these horses. Well, the people who love these Mustangs and love the West the way it was don't want this to happen. And so they came up with this organization to deal with the problem in a realistic way so that the horses wouldn't be killed. The organization they started when they heard they were going to euthanize them was called Saving America's Mustangs. And they offered to enter into a contract with the Bureau of Land Management to relocate at least 9,000 of these horses into these lands that they just bought and got permits for, so they wouldn't have to be shipped to these pens 1,000 miles away. Now, it makes absolutely no sense to me at a time when we're fighting fiscal problems in this country. We've got trillions of dollars in debt, and unless we start cutting spending, we're going to see this country go into bankruptcy. Moody's has already said they may have to reevaluate the bond rating for the country. Well, let me just end up, Mr. Speaker, by saying it seems to me that we ought to be frugal with the public's money. We ought to cut the Bureau of Land Management's budget so that we can save the money and save the Mustangs. That's what this is all about, a humane way of treating the Mustangs, Speaker.
Gentleman yields